We are in a series called Before and After, and we're going to wrap it up next week. We're going to have a lot of fun. Those of you who are coming to the Valentine's thing Thursday night, you got to have tickets first of all. But we're going to have a blast. But we're going to talk about the Bible and the bedroom next week, and so we're going to have a lot of fun and just kind of dig into that, and it should be very, very interesting. Okay, so week one in this series, we kicked it off talking about different vows that we make. Before we jump into that, I'm going to ask for your grace today, because the topic that we're talking about is something that I feel either underqualified or absolutely unqualified to talk about. But I don't think we can steer away from those things as pastors. I think we have to delve into things sometimes that aren't as comfortable or aren't as easy, or maybe that sometimes we run the risk of being misunderstood or misinterpreted, or maybe we just sometimes don't say all the right things. So I'm going to ask for your grace ahead of time, and I promise you that what I'm going to talk about today is for your help and your benefit, especially if you're in this season of life. So today we're specifically talking about what we are going to call blended families or step families, okay? And so we'll talk about that in a minute, and we'll navigate through the process together, and we'll learn some things as we go. So we kicked off the series in week one, and we started talking about vows, and I'm giving you a promise or a vow every week as we talk about marriage. And the first week we talked about the vow of priority. And we said, I promise that God will be my one and my spouse will be my two. God will be my one and my spouse will be my two. We have to keep that in order, and that's going to play a huge part in what we're going to talk about today, because this is going to tie into the context of the conversation as well. If you're joining us online today, maybe you haven't caught up with everything, you can catch up in previous weeks from this series. Week number 2, we talked about the vow of pursuit. We said we always promise to pursue our two. As a husband, I pursue my wife. As a wife, you should pursue your husband and learn how to communicate in that process. Week number 3, we started dealing with some things from the past. Many married people also said, you know what, I got to go back and tackle some issues. A very powerful week, a lot of next steps taken in the process. We said the vow of preparation, I promise to prepare for we by dealing with me. There's some stuff in our life that we deal with, and some of us didn't deal with it before we got married, and we have to go back and tackle those issues along the way. Then we talked a lot about sex in the context of staying pure in our lives, and we ended with this particular one. It says, "I promise to communicate with and not isolate from you." In other words, I'm going to communicate with my struggles. I'm not going to isolate with my struggles. I'm not going to hide. I'm going to communicate with you, but I'm also going to communicate with people who are maybe friends that can help navigate the process, spiritual mentors in my life. Okay. Last week we talked about partnership, and it was one of the highlights of the series. In fact, I had many people say it was one of their favorite messages in the series. It was super simple. There was nothing major theological about it. It was just basic understanding of marriage. And we said, I promise that our marriage will be about we and not about me. And the focus many times is me, my needs, my wants, my desires. And we tried to flip the script on that. So today we're going to pick up with one more vow. But before we do, I have to confess to you something without the fear of judgment, okay? I don't want you to judge me this morning, but you can participate, and you don't have to act like you're super spiritual. But how many of you, when you were a teenager, when you were 12, 13, 14, 15, 18, 20, 22, maybe you're 35 and you're still in this particular situation, you ever had this thought, will I ever get married? Anybody? Come on. Okay, all you other people were so confident, okay? And so, I always wondered, like, I saw when I was 12 some things I probably shouldn't have seen with kids starting to date and things at school that you just, your kids are exposed to. And I began to start really wanting to be in relationships. And I started asking, will anybody ever really accept me? Will they desire to be with me? And, at 13 years old, your mind starts doing crazy things. So I'm just going to tell you how my little 13-year-old mind worked. I've matured since that point. I'm just going to tell you it's been 20 plus years since this. So I have grown up. Do not judge me in this process. But around 13 years old, I began to ask myself, will anybody ever want to marry me? And here's the next thought that came to my mind. And will she be ugly? Come on, like that's what I thought when I was 13. What if one person in the world, because at that point I thought there's only one person in the world for everybody until I realized that's not the way it all works. And what if this one person in the world is the only person that ever loves me and she is not very pretty? Like, am I just going to settle to be single, or am I going to just have to go for it? I don't know. But that's the way I felt in my 13-year-old vain little mind. And if you didn't think that way, that's okay. Maybe you have more of Jesus than I did. But the idea is that I wanted to get married and I wanted to have kids, and I had all these questions about the future, what it would look like, and if anybody would love me, and if anybody. And so I know this though. I never dreamed of getting married with the intent or the idea that one day we would have kids and be divorced. That was not on the radar, and I would probably argue that for none of us in this room was that the plan. And so here's what I know. If I felt that at 13 years old or 15 years old, and many of us have felt these different feelings and processed them different ways, Maybe you're 35 now or 40 and you're single again, you have kids. You're kind of reliving those thoughts. Will I ever be married again? Will I ever fall in love again? How will it affect my kids? What will that look like? And can I be honest with you? I'm not going to pretend to understand that. I think sometimes as pastors, as Christians even, we try to pretend like we understand everybody's struggles. I can't fathom what you're going through. I can't fathom the anxiety that it's caused, the fear that it's caused, the hurt that it's caused. But today, I think we have to delve into these things. I think we have to talk about it because many, many, many people in our church have been married and divorced and have kids in the process. So today, we're going to talk about the idea of the blended family or the step family. Now, we're going to lean toward the conversation leaning toward step family, that term, and you'll see why here in just a moment. Although that was not my original thinking, I was convinced in reading this week, which we'll dig into this as we get a little further, that that's a better term to use. Now, before we jump in, let me just kind of tell you a couple quick stories. When Jace, my 11-year-old, was, I don't know, he was 5 or 6 or 7, I don't know, somewhere in the process, we started having conversations about, the possibilities of adoption and how we may want to adopt one day and all that kind of stuff. And in the middle of the conversation, he just began to cry. And I thought, that's the most selfish kid I've ever met in my life. That's what I was thinking. And so I was like, what's wrong, buddy? Because he's not a crier. He's not a highly emotional kid. And I said, what's wrong? And he couldn't articulate what he was thinking. And about 20 minutes later, after a breakdown, he says to me, I don't want you to give me up for adoption. To which I thought, buddy, if you'd have said that like a minute in, we could have solved a lot of your crisis. Talking about communication, we got to learn to communicate, right? Then a few years later, now Julie and I don't have an issue arguing or disagreeing in front of our kids. We try to do it appropriately. We don't throw stuff. We don't punch. We don't call people names. We don't do any of that stuff. But we do disagree. Usually it's her fault, but we usually, we do disagree. And one night we were arguing and we were having a conversation and Jace had been exposed, I think, here at church. Somebody had told him specifically that their parents were going through a divorce. And I came in the living room afterwards, and he almost had tears in his eyes. And I said, what's wrong, buddy? And he said, y'all aren't going to get a divorce, are you? I said, buddy, we're probably arguing over me leaving something on the floor. No, we're not getting a divorce, okay? And but in his mind, the emotion was real. Now, I say all that to say, if the fear of those things, of losing a mom or a dad by being put up for adoption, or losing a mom or a dad for a divorce, if that was real in his mind at 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, then it's very, very real when it plays itself out in your life and in your family and in your kids. And so that's the only thing I can even relate it to is the emotion that I saw with him in just for a moment versus the emotion that comes that lasts and has to heal over a lifetime. And so when we're talking about the idea of a step family or a blended family today, let me just kind of give you a definition so that we can work from the same context, so that we all understand what we're talking about and we're all clear. Here we go. This is simply this, where one or both spouses bring children into the marriage, okay? So it can play itself out like I was married, had kids, divorced, and remarried. I had children before I got married, and now I'm married. So we've blended family. In other words, there is maybe a stepmother or a stepfather that enters the equation in the process. And when that happens, let's be real honest, challenges take place. Why are the challenges so real? Why is it that there is a higher divorce rate in blended families than first marriages or even second marriages without children? Why is it? Well, here's why. Because when you look at the scriptures, and when you see God's order is that marriage comes first, then children. Marriage, then children. Unfortunately, along the way, somewhere we get it backwards because we've had kids now we enter. It's not any fault of our own. We never planned the process, but something happens, and in blended families, we get children before marriage. And so what we have is we see now that brings some complications into the mix. That brings more relationships, more identities into the mix. Guys, you're going to have to keep up with me here. And so we are going to 1 Corinthians chapter number 13. We've read that before. And so I want to read this, and I think Paul indicates why chapter number 7, why it gets so difficult when we get things out of order. It says in verse 32, we read this the very first week. It says, I would like you to be free from concern, Paul says. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs. how he can please the Lord. In other words, when he's single, he's not married. He's focused on what just God first. But now if he gets married, it says, but a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world. In other words, now he has marriage and he has God, he has marriage, and whatever comes with marriage after that can complicate the process. And he says how he can please his wife. And his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to please the Lord both in body and in spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. And he says, I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. What is he saying? He's saying this, that if you're single, it's a little easier because you don't have the responsibilities of all life and marriage. When you get married, it gets complicated because now your interests can be divided. And let's be honest, at some point in all of our life, no matter how spiritual we are, we've gotten the God-spouse thing out of order. And if we're not careful, we've put our spouse above our relationship with God. The same thing can be true when you have kids. I see this all the time. Kids kind of come first a lot of times, then spouse or God or spouse, but we will put our kids on a pedestal God never intended for us to put them on. And so Paul is saying, if you can stay single because it's a lot less difficult to manage your devotion to God. When you get married, there's more responsibility, more relationship capital that's invested. When you have kids, it even gets more complicated. So now let's reverse engineer. We get married, it gets complicated. We have kids. Then divorce happens. Then we get married with kids. I can imagine what the Apostle Paul would say to us today is, man, you talk about trying to deal with more relational capital and relational pull when there's mom and dad, stepmom, stepdad, children are trying to find their identity in the process. It gets challenging. And so what we know is that marriage is the nucleus of a family, not children. Marriage is the nucleus of a family, not children. Genesis 2:24, we've talked about this almost every week. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united with his wife, and they become one flesh. One flesh. So they're united, the two become one. That is God's centerpiece. It's his foundation, because we also know this, children are a temporary assignment. In fact, some of you are like, oh, they're 13, I can't wait till they're 18, they get out of my house. But for the most part, let's just say 18. They graduate from high school. The goal is to see them launch. Some of you still got 35-year-olds and you're like begging. You're like, maybe by the time they're 18 twice, they'll 36, they'll get out of here. But our goal is to see them grow up, to train up a child, the scripture says, in the way he should go, so that when he's old, he will not depart from it. They're a temporary assignment. But what happens is, oftentimes, and I think it's all good intentions, we put our children above our marriage and many times above God. And so we find ourselves doing anything and everything we can to give our little ones a happy, joyous life, to the point to where, as little American boys and girls, we can spoil them to no end. And so at the end of the day, they grow up. Our central focus in our home can be around the kids, and then they launch out, and we wonder why empty nest hits us so hard. Because we don't know where our identity is. We've lost the foundation being about the marriage. The foundation became about running the kids all over and doing whatever. And Julie and I have had many conversations going, listen, when the kids are gone, baby, I want those to be the best years of our life. But we get so focused on our kids, married or married again, we can focus on our kids and get that out of order. So let's jump into today's vow and then let's process some things. Here we go. The vow we're talking about today is the vow of patience. And here's what it is, especially when you're dealing with this idea of step families or blended family, is I promise to be patient with the process. Patient with the process. Now, if you're 18 and single, listen to me, or 15 or 22 and single, you need to be patient with the process. Don't settle for some dude or some lady just because they pay you. Be patient with that process, because if you can't be patient with that process, the process only gets more difficult. If you are married and you've been married a year and you're like, dear God, I don't think I can take 50 more years like this. Listen, be patient with the process. If you're 10 years in and you just had your first kids and you got new kids and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much stress, or you got 3 kids now, because what I've heard is when you have 1 kid, it's 2-on-1. When you have 2 kids, it's man-to-man. When it's 3, you move to his own defense. That's what I've heard. Okay, and so you're like, I can't handle this, and you're ready to give up. Be patient with the process, okay? Maybe you find yourself single again. Listen to me. Be patient with the process. Don't rush in and feel like I've got to find love immediately. So let's talk about the process, because I want to speak to you specifically today, and I hope you'll receive this and it makes some sense to you, and it can challenge all of us to do better as we navigate the process. So we're going to talk about steps to building a life together. Now, before we do, let me just tell you, this is not original content by any stretch, but I want to recommend a book to you that we have for sale for $10 for those of you who are in blended families, step families, however you want to use that language, or you know someone. Let me tell you something. Everybody knows someone who's in this situation. And so what we're going to do is, this is called 7 Steps to a Healthy Family. And I want to talk to you about 6 of these steps. I'm only going to give you 2 of them today, and then you can go buy the book, because this is the process. Now, you don't have to agree with everything in this book. You don't even have to like what's in this book, but I want to put resources in your hands, and you may want to buy them today, because they are going very, very fast. So let's jump in, and we're going to start with what's in number 2 in this book. It'll be number 1 for the sake of our conversation today. If we're going to have a healthy family, whether blended or not, whether it's new family, blended family, you're newly married, we have to learn this. We have to step down the pace of expectations. Step down the pace of expectations. This is true. I've done marriage counseling for young adults before. Let's be real honest. How many of you had unrealistic expectations the first time you got married? Yep. Look, they couldn't wait to get their hands up over here. It's like, me. Tell him. Okay, so here's the thing. Like, if you ask her, how much time are you going to communicate every day? Oh, it's not going to be what he says. He's going to be like, I didn't know we had to talk after we got married, right? So how many times a week are you guys going to have sex? And she's like, I don't know, 1 or 2. He's like, girl, that's 1 or 2 a day. You know, he's like, not on the same page. And so we had to talk about navigating expectations. So now when you take a couple of children and 2 new families kind of blending together, coming together, you know that there's all kinds of expectations that come with that. And listen to this little few sentences right out of this book. It says, one dangerous motivation for finding new love is running from the ache of pain. Feelings of guilt, rejection, loss, and sadness have an intoxicating and blinding effect on your ability to make wise dating choices. This is true when you're 15, when you're 18, or if you're single again. We get caught up in the emotion, and if you've been hurt by a previous marriage or some previous relationship, and you're trying to figure out how to navigate the balance of the kids, or maybe something tragic happened, do you understand how emotionally caught up we can get in that season of life and rush through a process? Rush to find love and hope that it all works itself out. Let me give you an illustration from the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the children of Israel, they were the people of God, the children of God. They were in bondage, in slavery in the nation of Egypt. They begged God. They had prayed to God and pleaded with God for them to be released from slavery. And God uses a man by the name of Moses to come and rescue them from slavery. And if you know the story, there's plagues that happen, and God does all these miracles, and they are free from slavery. God releases them, and they wander out into the wilderness. They see the parting of the Red Sea. They see all these miracles in the hand of God, but then they had to wander around for 40 years. See, they wanted to go from slavery, not just to freedom, but from slavery to the promised land in a moment, and God had a process in mind. And in the middle of the process, listen, they start grumbling. They start complaining about having not enough food or the right kind of food, or they're tired of the same food. Then they say, we were better off, listen to this, in slavery. Well, no, they weren't. No, they weren't. They just didn't want to go through the process. True story. When I preach heavy messages, and sometimes I don't know how to have a little comic relief, I'll go to Julie and I'll say, all right, I need some help here. And so she'll say, oh, tell that story. And she's like, gold, she would never tell it, but she gives me permission to tell it. So I tell the story with her permission at her request, because if not, you could think I was being a little mean. So we had some friends in town from Germany one time. And the lady was here between the holidays, and they call it holiday over there, and we call it, Thanksgiving, we call it Christmas. They just call it holidays. So she was here after Thanksgiving. Now, if you grew up in the South, you grew up on turkey and dressing, right? Dressing. If you never had dressing, you probably aren't going to heaven. And if you don't eat cranberry sauce, not cranberries like the sliced, gooey, nasty canned kind, okay? It's like half a bite of cranberry sauce with that's the only way to eat it. The only Christians eat it that way. And so at the end of the day, if you haven't had turkey and dressing, then you haven't lived yet. And so my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, she does a mean dressing. And so every year she would start doing this thing where she would say, okay, I've made some to send home with you in case you want to make some at home afterwards. Because I don't know if y'all have that mother-in-law who doesn't understand portion size. It is there's only 12 of us. Why can 112 eat right now? And so she will send it home. And so we were talking about the holidays, and this lady was like, I've never had dressing. And Julie's like, oh, well, you'll love dressing. So she decides she would cook her some of this dressing. Unfortunately, let's just say this. I don't build things. Julie don't cook, okay? And so she says, let me get you that. And so she takes the dressing out, and she scoops it up, and she puts it in the microwave to heat up, and she serves it to this lady, only to realize that the dressing was raw and not cooked before she served it. And go, you should go talk to her after the service. She told me to tell the story, okay? And so the lady's eating it, and she's trying to be nice, because she's in a foreign country, and she's like, no, I don't know. And then she eats like 2 bites, and she's like, she didn't like it. And then I asked you, listen, did you cook it? She's like, I thought it was already cooked. So I was like, no, there's a process for dressing to end up tasting good. All right? Now, I tell you all that because I got some illustrations for you. All right? As we're talking about this idea of the blended family, the step family, a lot of times, the reason I actually am kind of been swayed away from the idea of a blended family is because what we like to do when we make things is take mom and dad and expedite the process. And so we'll take dad and put him in here. We'll take mom because she's really sweet. And this is the mean child at celery. And then we put everything in the blender together. We'll just tear that child in two. And we put everything in here. And then we want everything to just kind of happen quickly, don't we? And so we turn it on. There's your happy family. And we see people in the family losing their individual identity, don't we? Because it's like, no, he's your new dad. You're going to listen to what he says. But they don't have trust for a new dad yet. Or stepdad yet. They don't have trust. They haven't. And so now we're like, where's Lucy? Half of her still showing. And so you see where there's a process that has to occur. So this is why I don't necessarily like the term blended family. Let's talk about some of these for those of you who cook. What is this? A food what? Why? Because we don't like the process. We want this to handle the process quickly, right? We think about just kind of throwing things in a bowl and mixing it up and serving it like it's an easy, but there's no process. This one here, some of you guys will help me out. This is not a microwave. This is better known as a ramen noodle maker for college students. 12 cents and you could be full in college. Any guys in the house right here, right? So like this became instant. We just want it overnight. We don't want to wait overnight. We want it like right now in this moment. We don't want any preparation. And then this one is the new instant. Ready for this? Y'all know what this is, right? Instant Pot. Some of y'all y'all don't remember what it was like when your grandmother had to get up at 5 a.m. to put the pot roast on, right? My grandmother had to get it up at like 5 a.m. because everybody's coming over for lunch after church. And it took like 9 hours for that thing to get ready. Now it's like 30 minutes later and it's ready. It's the same. And it's like because we undercut the process. And this author, Ron Deal, says, if you're going to have a success in a blended family, it's more like a crock pot. It's low heat over time. And so this way is when we put all the different family members in. This is a bad illustration, but go with me. We don't cause them to just lose themselves in the process. Things soften. It starts tasting better together. It goes through But we still have each individual item in such a way that people have their identity. Listen to me. Every single person in your family, you, your spouse, your child, your children, are created in the image of God with a purpose. And we have a responsibility as parents to navigate and nurture that process. And so we've got to sometimes step down the expectations that, all right, we're married, we're moving in, and we're just going to leave shrapnel along the way. And we got to slow the process down and understand. Psychologists tell us today now, the blended family is to function healthily and strong with total trust take anywhere from 5 to 7 years. 5 to 7 years. No wonder the divorce rate is higher. Because we fall in love, we get married, and now we got to figure out the process with the kids, and it's not easy, and it ends up wrecking. Sometimes they don't know. They're at mom's or dad's one weekend. They don't know how to navigate this new dichotomy of, okay, we were this way, now we're this way, and we were single. And so we got to slow down the expectations and be patient with the process. Here's the second one. I'm only giving you 2 out of these 6. You'll have to go get the book for the other 4. We have to 2-step together in our marriage. This is true of any marriage, right? Two stepping together, dancing. You gotta think about keeping your eyes on one another, staying in rhythm with one another, making sure you're working together in the process. So how do you do this as parents, especially if you're raising kids that were not your biological children? First of all, this whole process starts with establishing trust. Establishing trust. Now, let me pause for a minute and tell you that if you are married now with children of a previous marriage, you had time in the dating phase to build trust that maybe your children didn't have time to build. Let me stop and say this though. If you didn't trust and you got married before you trusted, you undermined the process. And so if you're single again or single, don't get married until you do trust. Because too many second marriages, listen, there is a lower trust and a higher expectation. What do I mean by that? Many times we go into a first marriage and we're like, oh gosh, I just want to be married. I trust you and I give you my world. And there's all this trust and like we don't even know like what we expect because we've never experienced it. But then there's the divorce that happens. There's pain, there's hurt, there's agony, there's anxiety. And now we go into the second marriage going, I'm not letting that happen again. And so instead of having an innocent until proven guilty, we have a guilty until proven innocent mentality. Because anything that resembles what happened there, I'm going to hold you accountable and I'm going to hold you captive to what happened in my past. And so this is why we must date no matter where you're at to establish trust. If you're 18, you date to establish trust. Trust is not formed after you're married because marriage is trust. Marriage is trust. This is how Adam and Eve in the garden, if we ever want to get back to what the Bible says, they were naked and felt no shame. They had absolute trust. When trust was violated, shame entered. Marriage is trust. The reason we don't have intimacy in our marriages many times because we don't trust each other. We don't know how to bear our soul and our bodies before one another in such a way that is built on trust. And so in the early stages of a blended family or a step family, the task is not to make wholesale changes, but to spend time getting to know each other. This means that we don't always have the freedom to ship the children off to babysitting and then go out on dates all the time. We got to build trust with the kids. We got to build trust with our new stepmom, new stepfather. As a child, when my child said, "You're not getting a divorce, are you?" It wrecked me. And I thought that was just a moment's thought. What about the children who've been through the process? It pains me and it hurts me and it makes me aware of what our children in our church and our families go through when we can watch the attendance patterns on Sunday. Child here, child gone. Child here on Sunday, gone the next Sunday. Here one Sunday, gone the next. Because you're having to navigate all the challenges that come. It takes time to build trust. A blended family causes a natural reprioritization to occur. In other words, let me say this, and this is where I have to have the freedom to say some things that might be a little touchy. As a single parent, you've been single for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. You've had these children now for 2, 3, 5, 10 years. You have a bond that you went God, spouse, assuming it was, the goal would have been God, spouse, children, to now as a single parent, it is hopefully God, children. Now, what happens when you get married? Children have been the top priority next to God for how long? There's a bond. But now when you remarry, your spouse that marriage has to become number 2 next to God. It has to take priority. And you say, well, I could never do that. Hear me. I understand. Julie and I had a conversation. We've had this conversation many times. What if something happened to me? We've talked about our financial situation. What if something happened to her? How would we do with the kids and homeschooling and all the different things that we do? And one of the things we've come to the conclusion of is like, I don't know that she or I could ever remarry until our kids were at a place where they're almost take care of themselves, because I'm not sure I could give a new spouse somewhere if something happened, or she could give a new spouse that priority in our lives. And until we're ready to, we have to slow the process down. Because we rush into something and then the marriages cause tension because we don't allow discipline and parenting to happen. We're not on the same page. There's all these issues because we haven't taken time to build trust with the kids and with one another. Here's the second part of the 2-step. Ready? We have to disassociate from the past. I don't mean like they never see mom or dad again. I mean disassociate from the pains and the joys of all that happened in the previous relationship. You ever heard that song, "When the Heart Breaks, It Don't Break"? You may not have heard that. This is like, y'all don't listen to music here. Okay, it's cool. So I used to do this illustration in student ministry, and here's what I would do. I would take a pink piece of paper and a blue piece of paper, and I would glue them together, and I would talk about how a bond forms when you get married, especially in the context of sex and the consummation of marriage, and then let them stay there for 3 or 4 minutes, and then you pull them apart, and without fail, there's blue on the pink and pink on the blue because it doesn't break even. There's shrapnel, there's pain, there's hurt. I left a little bit of my heart. I left a little bit of my soul, I left a little bit of my mind back in that relationship. But listen, your vision for your new marriage cannot be not to re-experience the past. Hear me out, because we go into new relationship and we're like, well, I'm not going to let that happen again. And 10 years after a divorce, 50% of people say they still have unresolved feelings towards their previous relationship. So 50% of divorced people still have feelings towards their ex-spouse. Now, here's what that looks like. Happens in two ways. The enemy will do two different things to make those feelings continue to happen in your life. The first thing he'll do is he will try to pervert our memories. Here's what he did to the children of Israel, right? They're running through the wilderness for 40 years, and they're like, well, God, you haven't done enough for us. And he's like, I rescued you from slavery. And so they start saying things like, we'd be better off there. Well, no, you won't. Your memories, because you remember some of the little bitty idiosyncrasies that were better than this, but that's not better. And if we're not careful, we'll go back, because here's what we know. When you got married, there was at least some kind of spark. There was at least some joy. There was at least something that happened that caused you. And so if we're not careful, we'll glamorize all the good things and we'll compare. And 10 years later, we go, man, I miss those things. Or the enemy will poison our memories. So he'll pervert our memories or he'll poison our memories. And this is where unforgiveness comes in. He hurt me, she hurt me, they hurt the kids, they left, they abandoned. I'll never forgive. And so 10 years later, I'm in this marriage trying to build it with anger and bitterness toward my past. Do you know what unforgiveness towards someone else does to you in your relationships with everyone else? I can be angry and have unforgiveness toward this person, but it comes out toward the people who are around me the most. You know why? Because that person's nowhere to be found and they don't have to deal with it. So I have to let my wrath come out somewhere. Listen to me. Forgiveness is the most self-loving act you can ever do for yourself in your life. You say, what do you mean? Here's why. Because what happens is when something happens to me, I am forced to make a decision. Am I going to hold on to this bitterness, this anger, this resentment, and unforgiveness and live in a prison by which I give the person who offended me or hurt me the key to? Because I'm mad at you and I'm angry and I'm not going to let you get off. I'm going to show you by not forgiving you, and they're doing their own thing, but I'm still living in my unforgiveness prison. The greatest gift I can give myself in that situation is to forgive them and take back the key and unlock the door and let myself out of my own self-inflicted prison. Because you understand somebody who's hurt you don't really care if you forgive them most of the time. I don't care because they've gone on. Don't allow them to control your future. And so if we have a bad situation from past as a child or a relationship in a marriage or whatever, we have to forgive and take the keys back. This is true of all our relationships, isn't it? As a pastor, if I'm candid, there have been times where I've put my neck out on the line and trusted people, and man, it's hurt. Not the same as a marriage, don't get me wrong, or a divorce, but what I have to do now is I have to start disassociating myself from those things, or I'll hold other people. I'll look through the wrong filter, won't I? I'll look through the wrong and go, well, that person hurt me, so I must not can trust this person. And this is the same thing in our lives, in every area of our life. We have to disassociate. We have to release forgiveness. And we watch Dateline. Anybody here watch Dateline? I don't know if my wife's up to something. She's planning something in the future that I don't know about. I don't know. But we watch all these Datelines, and almost without fail, if they show at the courtroom at the end, rarely do you see a family go, listen, I'm angry and I'm bitter, but by the grace of God, I'm going to forgive you. No, in fact, we watched one last night. At the end, it was like, I don't care what you ever do. I hope you live in misery and hell and this and that and the other, and I will never forgive you. So while one person shipped off the prison, you put yourself in your own prison. I'm not saying forgiveness is easy. I'm saying it's necessary. Here's the last part of this one. We got to dream new dreams together. So if you're remarried and you have kids from a previous marriage, you got to dream new dreams together as a family. Not react to the past. We've built trust. We've disassociated. Now let's start fresh. So when Julie and I started the church, for those of you who don't have the history of our church, we're about 8 years old as a church. We started the church with 5 people in 2010, and God has been incredible in the process. And around 2015, we started building this building. But before we started building this building, we went through some stressful times with trying to find land and a property and all that, because it's very difficult to find the right resources here in Henry County. And coming out of the recession that happened in 2009, 10, 11, a lot of land was foreclosed on. There's all kinds of stuff that happened. So we put an offer on a piece of property in 2012 or 13, I can't remember, and put a substantial money down on that. And when we were getting ready to go to the hearing at the Henry County, board of directors and just trying to figure out whether they would give us the ability to build on that land, we realized that there had been some problems with that particular piece of property, and the people who say they owned it and took the contract on it had a previous sale on the property, caused some title issues, and we had to walk away from the property. And in doing so, there was frustration that began to build, because I'd stood up for the church and told the church, hey, we're excited and celebrated. So we had to go to arbitration, and we got a settlement out of that and got all the investment we had back. But then we had to start over the process. And so we bought this land, and through the generous people that call Relevant Church their home, they gave toward this initiative. And we built this building, but this building caused a lot of anxiety in our family. In 2015, we started the process, and we had 12 straight weeks of rain toward the fall of that year. And our goal was originally to be in by January, and it didn't happen because of rain. And it's just a process, man. It just is. And so y'all might remember this if you were here. Our goal was to move in like January, February. We ended up having to move in the week before Easter as a trial run. So in the matter of like 8 days, we had like 9 services. It was ridiculous. And we didn't know if things were going to work, and the stress of getting colors and carpets and it was just crazy. And we were 60, 70, 80 hours a week trying to get in, our staff. And it took its health toll physically on us as a family, specifically my wife. Stress causes your body to do different things, and some essential things in her body just dropped in her blood, and she went through a series of just anxiety and things that happened there. And through the process, we had to kind of heal. And in that season of life, there was some negativity and criticism from outside and inside and everything else, and it was hurtful. It was painful. We had a choice. We grew quickly. We grew by like 600 people overnight. We didn't know what to do. We didn't have enough staff. We're out of space still, and I think part of our growth limitation is the fact that we hit seasons where we don't have room for people to sit or park, for crying out loud. But we had to heal. We had a conversation privately. We said, look, we're not going to try to force something to the next phase. We got to heal so we can dream new dreams. Because we can bullnose into another process and campus, and we almost did. Or we can bullnose into a new build, and we're not healthy. We have to get healthy so that we can dream again. And here we are. And I think we're on the cusp of the next great season of our church's history. As people's lives are being changed, many people come to know Christ in the last month. They're going to get baptized. Hopefully, if you haven't signed up, baptized February 28th or March 3rd. It's a great opportunity for you to take your next step. God's doing some cool stuff. But we weren't healthy enough to dream dreams together back then. I just wonder if the reason you can't dream dreams as a family is because you got to deal with some stuff. You've undermined the process. So in this book, here's the final 4 steps. I'm going to give them to you real quickly. I'm not going to talk about them. The third one is step in line as a parental team. That's tough, isn't it? Like, you better make sure you're on the same wave when it comes to parenting each other's biological children, especially if you want to be embraced. It's nothing for a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and then a family to have a 13-year-old. And the 3 and the 5 and the 7-year-old connect with the new stepfather or stepmother, but the 13-year-old can't. How are you going to navigate that? Here's the 4th one. Sidestep common pitfalls. How are you going to deal with the financial issues? How are you going to deal with, if there is or isn't, some type of a, child support or whatever? How are you going to deal with holidays and vacations and all that? Number 5, step through the wilderness with trust and determination. In other words, when the going gets tough, don't give up. Here's some steps to navigate that. And the last one is to step up your faith. Making faith the center of your home. So we said, I'm going to promise to be patient with the process. That's the promise today. That's the vow today. But let me leave you with this thought before we pray. And this goes for all of us in any process of life. For the process to work, you have to work the process. That's why I want you, if you're in that situation or in that season of life, to go get this book, because this gives you a process. But for the process to work, you can't go like, oh man, now we're good. We're good. We heard that message this morning. No, it's a process. And I just want to say this before we close. Messages like this are hard. Because sometimes you wonder if you know what you're talking about, right? So you look to God's words, you look to wisdom of things like this. And my heart and my prayer is to deliver a message that is encouraging to you, that will inspire you. Because listen to me, some of you, you've been single parents. Can I tell you, the single moms are my heroes. Like, there's some single moms here today. They got their kids out of bed and got them dressed to be in church. I think that is commendable. I think single moms, you do things I could never do. True story, 2 quick stories and I'll close. I was talking to somebody, a family this week who's going through a difficult season, and I asked one of the kids, and I just said, hey, how's your dad doing? And the kid said, well, let's just say he wasn't cut out to be a mom. I said, I'll take that as not so well, okay? A lady my wife comes in contact with every single week at a meeting that she goes to, she's a single mom. She lives in this community, and she talks about how she gets up in the morning to drive a bus. She comes home and homeschools her kids and then goes and takes kids back to home from driving the bus. And I think, man, that's pretty remarkable, pretty honorable. Some single dads, you do the same thing. Single dad doesn't compute in my vocabulary. I'm just saying, because I need mom. But you guys are killing it. And I want you to navigate the process. Some of you have been remarried. As your pastor, the reason we delve into these topics is because I want you to not just take an end around and wonder how you got here. I want to see your marriage thrive, your children love Jesus, and I want to see people look at your marriage, even though it may be a second marriage or a third marriage, or maybe things happened before you found Jesus, and I want people to look at your marriage and go, man, there's Jesus in that marriage. And so while I may not know everything and know how to communicate everything, I ask that you would offer grace, and then we navigate this process together and know that we are cheering you on as your pastor and as your leadership team. Can we pray together? God, I'm so grateful that we have a God who loves us in spite of whatever situation or circumstance we're in, a God who always trusts, always loves, always perseveres. And I pray today, God, whatever season of life we find ourselves in, that we would have the courage to continue. And for those that have been remarried or single again, or the children involved in the conversations that we're talking about, I pray that through this process, we would see remarkable, incredible steps and strides towards you. For those that are watching online today, I pray that you would strengthen them, that you would encourage them, that they would know that you love them and if they're going through these seasons of life. And for all of us, that we would take steps necessary to navigate whatever season of life we're in so that you can be the center of it. In Jesus' name, amen.